Welcome, welcome, everybody. If you can see me and our fellow panelists, if you could say hey in the chat so we know you're here. So good to see you. We're going to get started in just a second with the video. Hey, everyone.
Oh, wow. So many awesome people in the chat. Hello, hello, hello.
Amazing. All right.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. Tell us where you're checking in from. We got some people from Boulder.
Good to see you all tonight. Welcome, welcome. Drew, if you want to kick us off with the video, and then we'll jump in with a real welcome from there. Thanks all for being here.
Oh, New York, Reno. Woo!
In 2020, Seed the Vote partnered with grassroots organizations in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Georgia. Together, we helped to defeat Trump, flip the Senate, and grow our movements for the future our communities deserve. We won in 2020. We defeated Trump, but as we are currently witnessing, this victory was not equivalent to power for our communities. We're still in the middle of a defining political moment. Democrats have razor-thin majorities in the House and Senate. Corporate Democrats making it difficult to pass meaningful legislation that will benefit our communities, and the Republican Party doing everything they can to undermine election integrity in 2022 and beyond. What happens in this year's midterm elections will either shift our federal political arena toward white nationalism and authoritarianism, or toward conditions that will usher in a progressive era and pave the way for long-term change. We are using the midterms and every subsequent election to organize our communities until we're able to shift the balance of power in Washington. This summer and fall, we're partnering with grassroots organizations in Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, building regional branches, reactivating our seed pods of family and friend volunteers, activists, and organizers to train up and outreach both virtually and in person to voters in these battleground states.
Amazing. All right. Hope that little pump up video was a nice entry point to get everyone in the room. Looks like we're up to 77 people on tonight. So good to not see you, but know that you're here. And we're going to get started now. So in case you were trying to be somewhere else, hopefully you weren't. This is Seed the Votes event, What's at Stake and How We Win. And my name is Rose. I am the organizing director at Seed the Vote.
My name is Cara. I'm the communications manager at Seed the Vote. So exciting to see all of you in the chat. Shout out to whoever's from Watertown, Massachusetts. I watched every Warriors game in a bar in Watertown, Massachusetts.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're gonna be your host tonight, and we're really excited in just a minute to welcome our speakers who are going to ground us in what this event, the title says, what is at stake, and how we're going to do what we have to do this fall. But first, I just wanted to, for anyone who's new to Seed the Vote, want to ground us a little bit in just who we are and why we're having this conversation tonight. So Seed the Vote is a project that started in the 2020 election cycle. We thought we were going to be a one-time project, really focused on using all of our collective energy and capacity and to throw down on what felt like a generational fight to defeat Trump, and to do that in a way that would grow our movements for the long term. And so we were so honored in 2020 to partner with grassroots groups in battleground states. We work with grassroots groups who are organizing year round because they know the strategy to win these key electoral fights. They know their communities, they know what it's going to take. And also because they're working to build power through elections and outside of elections. And that's the kind of work that we want to be part of in these fights. And so in 2020 and early 2021 for the Senate runoff, we recruited over 9,000 volunteers to make calls and knock doors with our partners. And it was an amazing experience. You know, a lot of you feel free to throw in the chat if you were around with us in 2020. It was so incredible to be in the work with all of you. And that's why we're so excited to be back because you know, for a number of reasons, really assessing both the collective impact that we all made together and also this ongoing moment of urgency with what the right is doing and what it's going to take to stop them, and also a moment of possibility with what we think is possible to win if we do stop them. We felt like there was an ongoing role for Seed the Vote in helping to add capacity to the work of our partners and, just make bigger wins possible in this key midterms fight and beyond. So the idea for this conversation today is to ground us in this political moment or to start grounding us. Obviously, there's a lot going on. It's very complex. We may not cover everything in an hour, but we're confident that the brilliance of Mario and Bill, who we have with us today, is going to ground us in what's going on, why this election matters, and how it's connected to the many other fights ahead. So we're so excited to have them here. And just a little bit about format, I'll say. There should be captions available. It's looking like we're having some issues on some screens not showing up. So just know if captions aren't working for you, this will be up on YouTube after and we'll have captions there. So if you need to watch anything back, if you're having issues with the captions, that is a backup option. And also we're going to have a little Q&A after we go through a few initial pieces of the conversation with Bill and Mario. So there's a little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can go ahead and start throwing questions in there whenever they come to you. So with that, just want to say welcome again to the 80+ people on. So great to have you. And I'm going to kick it over to Cara.
And I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists. You've seen their lovely faces this entire time, but we'll do a little formal introduction. And I actually will let them each introduce themselves just so that you can learn a little bit more about them. I'm going to ask you both just like one sentence about what keeps you in the movement or what brought you to the movement. But we'll start with Bill. Bill is a racial justice and labor and international activist and author. And Bill, will you just share a little bit with us?
Yeah, thank you, Cara, and thank you, Rose. I'm really glad to be doing this. What got me in the movement? I'm a child of the 60s. And what motivated me more than anything, or put me on the trajectory I'm on, was reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that changed my life. And what keeps me going is my daughter and my granddaughter. And feeling that this needs to be a better planet. And I can't afford the luxury of giving up. That's why I'm not sure even what the word retirement means.
Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
All right, we'll kick it over to Mario. Mario is the National Field Director of Unite Here, one of our partners in a bunch of states that we do our work. Mario, would you introduce yourself?
Cara, Rose, Bill, thanks. What's up, everybody? Born and raised in San Francisco. I'm 37, and I think watching that town get destroyed by, fire, finance, insurance, and real estate is probably what brought me to the movement. I came to the trade union movement from San Francisco Rising. Shout out to one of the Seed the Vote partner or founding organizations. I think the thing that keeps me going is the courage and dignity of workers who are down to struggle. It's 106 degrees right now in Las Vegas, where I'm talking to all of you from, and there are 137 people out knocking on doors right now because that's the only way we're going to win. Got another 73 up in Reno, where it's only 97. I'm looking in the chat. I see how hot it is across the Western United States, and it's that kind of level of commitment and struggle and dignity that I'm in it for. So thanks.
Oh, thank you both so much. Yeah, I feel motivated just hearing that. So I'm super excited for what's coming next. I'll go ahead and start us off with the first question. So we all know how much work went into the 2020 general election. For so many people, they put their hearts and sweat and tears into the 2020 election. And we won a key victory. Our political conditions have shifted over the last 2 years. Trump is no longer in office, you may have noticed. But here we are at the midterms and we're being asked to do all of this work again. So maybe you can help us understand why we feel the need to stay in the game. And we'll ask the question that sparked this entire event. What is at stake now? Is this midterm crucial, and why? And let's start off again with Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the easy part is this crucial? Absolutely. And one of the problems is that in every election in the recent past, you're told this election is the most important one in your life. And everyone is getting tired of hearing that. But here's the problem. It's true. In other words, the country is polarizing in a certain way so that the stakes in every election are increasing. I would argue that we live in a period that has been defined as a cold civil war, and that there are forces on the right that want to make that a hot civil war. Now, where did that come from? The right wing is relentless. In the late 1960s, when it was sort of the far right was starting to reform, they had a multi-decade strategy of fighting for power. And it included a series of alliances with people in the Republican Party that they despised. They hated people like Richard Nixon. They thought he was a liberal. But they basically looked at these alliances as ways of strengthening themselves with a final goal. And we're seeing today, in many respects, this play out, such that the right wing began with mass movements, litigation, legislation, chipping away at all the victories from the 20th century. I'm not just talking about the civil rights victories. I'm talking about all of the victories, labor victories, women's victories, et cetera, chipping away, weakening, and trying to drive different divisions among progressive forces. So the right wing had this multi-decade strategy, and they have been incredibly successful in this. And what we've now seen, particularly after Trump assumed leadership of the Republican Party, is that the Republican Party has not only driven out what had been a liberal wing. I mean, once upon a time, there were so-called liberals in the Republican Party, like Nelson Rockefeller, Jacob Javits, but these forces had been driven out of the Republican Party, but they weren't prepared to stop there. The Republican Party has now become the party for dictatorship. It's a party that is legitimizing, once again, the idea of voter suppression, and in their formulations, including the big lie, what's at stake is that they are saying that the wrong people are voting. See, that's where people are misunderstanding. Many people think that when Trump was talking about that he actually won the election and all this voter fraud, most of them are not that stupid. They know that Trump lost, but their argument really is that the wrong people voted. Who are the wrong people? Look in the mirror, right? That's who they're defining as the wrong people. So the agenda of the far right includes voting rights, and that is voter suppression. They see themselves as suppressing women and destroying the victories that women have won over the last 100 or so years, and they see annihilating the LGBTQ population. And I mean annihilate. This is no metaphor. This is no euphemism. They see annihilating LGBTQ folks. They are involved in major xenophobia and the rewriting of history, particularly when it comes to race. They want to eliminate any notion that there is a racial and settler colonial question in the United States and instead lead us to believe that we're in some sort of fantasy world. And they are pro-rich, but they're pro-rich in a very interesting way. Much like other right-wing, far-right forces around the world, they are advancing the notion of that there are the legitimate productivist rich, and then there are the unproductive rich. And this is an appeal, particularly to white people, to convince folks that there is a way to be a legitimate rich person, as opposed to some sort of charlatan. Now, there's one other piece, because I don't have much time, but let me just end with this. They're armed. Now, did I say that they were armed? Yes, I said they are armed. The far right is not talking simply about engaging in dialogue or even simple harassment. They have an armed wing, which includes groups like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And this armed wing has ties within the military and law enforcement. I don't mean the entirety, but they have ties there. And so when I said in the beginning that these folks are, that we're in a period of a cold civil war and that some of these folks want a hot war, they've made that very clear. So there is so much that's at stake in this election. This is not an election to sit out. This is not an election to complain about what was not accomplished since 2020. This is an election where the right has to be smashed.
Oof, I'm getting chills. Yeah, that's concerning. And also, yeah, this awareness of what we're up against, I think is paramount to understanding why this is so important, and the right coalescing around these very specific kind of ideas of ideology. Like, I think the left kind of gets painted as of identity, rather. Like, we get painted as the identity party, but there's an identity that's very deep in the Republican Party that coalesces them and keeps them together, even across when the ideologies are different, and that makes it hard for us. I think we've kind of covered the right there. Mario, do you want to take us through this question and maybe talk a little bit about what we can see happening if we can actually win and do this election cycle?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I think I'd add two things to that, Cara, to what Bill put out. The first is less historical in its sweep, and more about the terrain that we're going to fight on November 9th. That's where I'd start. And I'd start by saying, what are the stakes of this election? They're winning any kind of transformative federal legislation and regulations, taking on, say, the power of the for-profit healthcare industry, right? Or any number of non-reformist reforms that everybody in the chat might have on their bucket list. It's going to take a much higher level of organization in our society, and in particular, the organization of working people. Among other things, that means stronger unions with more union members who are willing to fight bosses. And I think that the Amazon labor union's victory in Staten Island, I think that the Starbucks union and LRB election victories, these have come into the fore and exploded into view under the Biden presidency and under a Democratic Congress. I don't think those things are a coincidence. And so, in other words, the stakes of the midterms are fundamentally about what terrain our movements, not just the trade union movement, can fight on after the election. And one really concrete example, for our union that I'll share has to do with the fate of card check neutrality agreements under the president. So just stay with me now for a second, because these are the stakes. A card check is a legal agreement between an employer and a union, and it lays out rules requiring an employer, like it says, to be neutral during the process when workers are organizing a union. Often there are provisions in it that have to do with the all-important period after workers have won a union, but before they've won that first contract, right? Card checks, in other words, are effectively a response to our country's broken private sector labor law, which for 75 years since the 1947 Taft-Hartley amendments, now I'm getting a little bit Bill Fletcher-like in my sweep. Bill, I took a class with you in college. We didn't do this in our intro, but since Taft-Hartley, right, our private sector labor law has been broken. Here's the punchline, sisters and brothers and siblings. Under the Trump administration, there were not less than 2 legal proceedings moving through the NLRB process that would have made card check illegal. One of the first actions of the interim general counsel at the NLRB was to end those 2 processes. That's an example of the terrain that we fight on now that would be different if we lose these midterms. Secondly, the stakes of this election, and now I'm just going to get a little more concrete, but along the lines of what Bill was saying with respect to the right, are whether we have free and fair elections in 2024. That's not shrill, lib outrageousness or flamboyance. That's just the truth. Let me give a couple of examples. There are just outright election deniers running in the top of the ticket races in a number of battleground states on the Republican ballot line throughout, the hottest US Senate and gubernatorial contests we have out there. Doug Mastriano, the Republican nominee for governor in Pennsylvania, was physically at the January 6th insurrection. He chartered 2 buses for his co-partisans to go with him. And he's promised to appoint a Secretary of State, which is an appointed position in the state of Pennsylvania, who will force all voters to re-register to vote. That's what Doug Mastriano has openly said. He's also promised, by the way, to outlaw abortion in January if he takes office, and given state legislative gerrymandering, it's extraordinarily likely that he'll have the opportunity to do that, given the Republican Party's hold over both chambers in Pennsylvania. In Nevada, the Republican US Senate nominee, Adam Laxalt, he was literally Donald Trump's counsel in state, his lawyer, fueling the big lie lawsuits subsequent to the 2020 election. And the Republican nominee for Secretary of State is a guy named Jim Marchand. Maybe you've read about him in newspapers outside of Nevada. He is a flamboyant election conspiracy theorist. And he's openly discussing ways to make sure that the 2024 election count, if he's the Secretary of State in Nevada, advantages Republicans. So especially if we win the vote this year, we expect state Republican parties to file lawsuits and to otherwise make it hard to count votes this year. So the stakes are about free and fair elections.
Well, I thought I was worried before, but here we are. Oh, wow. That's and thank you for bringing in those very concrete things. I think, very often we look at the difference between the 2 parties and we say, well, there's a lot of problems with the Democrats too, but bringing in those concrete examples of this is actually something that our unions are going to be facing, where their lives are tangibly different based on who's in power. It's really, really powerful. Thank you, Mario. I'm going to pass it over to Rose to maybe move us in a different direction.
Yeah, so I would imagine that what Mario and Bill both just spoke to bring up lots of questions, thoughts, reactions from all of you. So I would just say, if you have a follow-up question related to something either of them spoke to about what's at stake, go ahead and throw that in the chat or in the Q&A box, and when we might get a chance to get to it. But I want to shift us slightly into, we've touched a little bit on what's at stake, why this matters. And then the question just becomes, how are we going to win, And I think we are thinking about this, as Bill said to us when we were, talking before this event, it's about winning on 2 fronts, right? So we want to talk about how we're going to win on November 8th, and also how that connects to and how we want to win in ways that help grow the power of our social justice movements for the long term. Because we're not saying we're going to fix everything in the next 2 years by winning these midterms, but if we can set a firm foundation and stop the right in these key ways, some more things are going to be possible. So that's what we want to talk about, is how are we going to do that on both of those fronts, the short term and the long term. So Mario, if you could kick us off first, touching on what you think it's going to take to get to that immediate victory this fall.
Yeah, I think it's going to take thousands of people in motion. It's going to take, in other words, a massive ground game in battleground states that is effective and disciplined and rigorous. And there's 62 days left. It is not too late for the 87 of us on this Zoom and whoever else is paying attention to do something about it. Certainly donations are helpful. Certainly phone calls, certainly text messages. I think what I'd submit is that, we think that doing door-to-door canvassing, that having a face-to-face conversation with a voter in connection with a larger organization, say like a union that has a broader vision for how to transform a particular time and place and city and town and industry, is probably the most effective way to win on November 8th and win for our movements beyond. So Seed the Vote, like we saw in the video opening up this meeting, right, is connecting volunteers to swing state operations in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, and Wisconsin. My union, the hospitality workers, right, are throwing down in a major way in 3 of those places. And we're proud to partner with Seed the Vote in Nevada, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. In those places, we're knocking on 1 million doors. In Nevada, where the margin of Biden's victory was 33,596 votes. In Arizona, we're knocking on 750,000 votes, where the margin of Biden's victory was 10,457 votes. And in Pennsylvania, we're going to do another 1 million, right, where the margin of Biden's victory was less than 81,000 votes. We need to talk to voters about what's important to them. And the reality is that given inflation, many people's lives materially today are worse than they were 2 years ago. Inflation is a 600-pound gorilla that we need to have the ability to connect clearly with voters on. That is something that we can effectively do, and that the kind of partner organizations that Seed the Vote can connect you with are ready to train you up on and deploy you to do in a real way. We need you, and now is the time.
Pretty clear cut there. If you have follow-up questions about how you actually do that, we will be talking much more about that at the end of this call, so don't go away. But in the meantime, Bill, if you could speak a little bit to anything you want to say about, you know, what it's going to take to win on November 8th, but also speak to that second front of how we're preparing ourselves to position ourselves through winning this election to win larger victories long term.
Sure. Let me start with a response to a question that someone raised in the chat, because I think it's a good lead-in. And they asked me, what did I mean by smashed when I talked about smashing the right? And what I mean is eliminating the political potential and reach of an opponent. That's what smashing means. Now, that's related to the question of winning. You know, when we talk about winning, we got to begin with, like, who is we? And so if we're thinking, those of us on this call, in this program, are thinking about progressive forces, for the midterm elections, winning means defeating decisively the right, the Republicans. That's what it means. And it means that we need to have a very broad front. Now, for many progressive people, the idea of a broad front is very, very uncomfortable. You know, because if people don't necessarily have the same politics as we do, we often look down our noses at them. In the current battle that we're engaged in, and keeping in mind the objectives of our opponent, we need to build a very broad front of all those who oppose those politics. That's the bottom line. There's no way of sugarcoating it. That's what we're faced with in the immediate. But then there's the longer term issue of winning. The longer term issue of winning is really about developing an alternative set of politics and economic orientation, a transformative approach that's looking at not simply stabilizing the status quo, because the status quo cannot be stabilized. It's not acceptable, but it's about transforming. It's about addressing the environmental crisis. It's about addressing the economic crises. It's about expanding democracy. It's about the idea of fighting for a consistent democracy. And that necessitates organization. One of the lessons that we should have learned in the post-2020 period, post-George Floyd uprisings, is massive mobilizations in the absence of building organization leave you with very little. In fact, what it does is that it opens up a space that the other side comes in, enters, and flips the situation. That mass mobilizations are incredibly important, particularly when they build organization, when organization emerges to sustain the movement, to advance the movement, to help to lead it. And in many states around the country, there are just those kind of organizations. In addition to Seed the Vote, you have groups like the Progressive Democrats of America, you have the Working Families Party, you have statewide organizations in California, something California Calls. In other states, New Virginia Majority, there are progressive organizations that are power building, base building. And that's critical for the longer term, because we can't continue to fight simply on the defensive. Any fighter will tell you, if you remain on the defensive, no matter how strong you are, you're ultimately going to lose. At some point, you have to throw a punch. You have to throw more than one punch. You have to go on the offensive. And for us, that means building organization, strong organization, audacious organization, bold organization.
Amazing. That was such a great note to end on, because I would say, or to end this piece of the conversation on, because I would say all of our partner organizations who will be shouting out and getting you connected to at the end of this call are strong, bold, and audacious in the work that they're doing. So I love that. Thank you, Bill. I'll say a few of the questions. We're going to shift over to a Q&A now, so I'm going to kick it over to Kara for that. But I'll just say first, if you had questions that are more like logistical or about Seed the Vote's work, we're going to save those, and I'll hopefully address a few of them when we talk through next steps at the end. But first, excited to dig into some of these more political questions with Mario and Bill.
And I also say, if you have questions about Seed the Vote's work, a great place to go is in the info sessions that Rose is going to talk about in a little bit. But yes, I would love to dig into some of these political pieces. There was a question earlier from Holly, where she was asking about inflation and frustrations. And I think maybe I'll shoot this one to Mario first, but I'm gonna kind of rephrase it to get at some of the things that other folks were asking about. In fact, I had someone at my info session this morning who really wanted to know about what's important to people at the doors. And so the question I'm going to ask you is, when you're looking across Unite here, what are the big things that people are talking about? And when you're training your canvassers, how are you addressing those things, especially since some of these issues happened obviously during the Biden administration when the Democrats should have power?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's specific and different in certain places. So I think we hear certainly on the doors, say in Philly, a whole lot more about gun violence as the first thing that people want to talk to us about than we do in, say, the Las Vegas Valley, where we hear first about the housing crisis. Look, there are very specific things that if you come knock doors with us, we can tell voters about that are real. In Nevada, which is a hospitality state, right, where the casinos are the lifeblood of, the economy in this state, the reason the casino workers went back to work with their seniority after the pandemic shut them down for 2 months was because of a law called the Right to Return Law, Senate Bill 386, that incumbent Governor Steve Sisolak signed, that the Culinary Union sponsored. It's difficult to overstate how critical and important that is, not only for our 60,000 members and the 150,000 people for whom our collective bargaining agreements pay for healthcare in this town, but the rest of the city. So in other words, when we knock doors and we talk to people about why our candidates are the ones for working people, when we say what I just said, that the reason that people, do you work in a casino? Do you know people who work on the strip or downtown? Well, do you know that the reason that people went back to work when all the bosses wanted to leave people off, not bring people back, bring back the cheapest, the oldest, the more pliant workers, was because of this governor? He's the one to vote for. That is rather straightforward and compelling, we've found. That's also just, I see another question in the chat, Cara, and I want to be responsive to what you said, but I'm also thinking about, what we're saying we've been able to deliver for people in the last 2 years. That is, if that doesn't make you want to come knock doors in Nevada, sisters and brothers and siblings, I don't know what does. I also have to say that COBRA, look, I mean, we had 100% government paid the employer portion of people's healthcare who were laid off by the pandemic as a provision in the American Rescue Plan. Without getting into the struggle for single payer, like that was a momentous achievement. Not enough, not sufficient, but when we talk about, the ideological hold that for-profit healthcare has on our country, 100% COBRA healthcare was a major victory for folks. So those are some of the things that I would bring up. I think the other thing I'd say is voters and working class voters aren't stupid. In general, people believe that the Republicans are not going to help them. Even if Democrats are incumbents, this is what we find on the doors. This is what the polling shows us too. People are angry. People know things are messed up, and they don't believe that. I appreciated, Bill, your comments about the deserving rich, the productive rich. I think that in our experience, voters, as dissatisfied as they are with the current state of affairs, are not compelled by the vision that, what is Rick Scott saying? What are the Republicans saying? They're saying they want to end every law 5 years after it's been in effect, right? Ending Social Security and Medicare. That's what they're talking about. Meanwhile, we're talking about people going back to work. I'd start there.
Love it. Bill, maybe I'll take the next question towards you. There's a one in the chat by John Knowles here, and he's talking about how people are legitimately concerned about getting inundated with calls, visits, cards. I'm going to say, as a canvasser, that doesn't stress me out that much. I don't mind a little bit of annoyance. The main way to get me to stop knocking on your door is if you go vote. So I don't stress about that part. But the part that I think is interesting here is that he's saying groups feel like they can just swoop in regardless of local conditions and go to town. Many people are really upset by this. So I think the question maybe the larger question is, how do you help understand electoral politics as part of a larger social movement, which I think kind of connects to this question that's also being asked in the chat about long-term vision and passing big things in the future.
I feel like there's several questions in what you just raised. That's not a criticism.
No, I know I was a log rolling there, but if you can help me out.
It's interesting because so there's the issue of people rolling into town, and then there's this other issue which I'm going to get to. People complain a lot at election time. They get over it. That's my attitude. They get over it, right? It's like, I don't like these phone calls. I get over it, right? It doesn't keep me up at night. See, this is what I think we need to be thinking about. How do we take over different states? A number of years ago, I was invited to speak in Texas. And after I gave a talk, and then in the Q&A, people started telling me about how bad the situation was in Texas. And it was like this and this and this. And then they got quiet and they said, well, what do you think? And I stopped and I said, how do we take over Texas? Now they looked at me as if I was completely out of my mind. And I said, no, really. I mean, we can complain until the cows come home about how bad the situation is. All I'm interested in doing is winning. So how do we take over Texas? What are the key cities? What are the key counties? What counties can we ignore? Which are the key social movements? Who are the key opinion makers? In other words, you build a strategy with the objective of winning. The right wing has been doing this. We, however, progressives all too often are affected by one election, and then when things don't turn out quite the way we want, we get depressed. If you look at what's happened since 2020, most people, part of our message, or central to our message, should be more would have happened had we not had two Republicans that called themselves Democrats, right? Then, in other words, if we didn't have the balance of power that we did, then it's quite possible things would have moved in a better direction. So, and this is not something that happens because Joe Biden waves a wand or anything else. It comes about as a result of us building a base, us building struggle, and us advancing candidates that really represent the interest of working people. And this is really important. It's not just us responding to people who have put themselves forward, but bringing forward candidates out of the membership of Unite Here, out of the membership of National Nurses United, out of the membership of AFSCME or SEIU or whatever, out of the membership of grassroots organizations, bringing them forward, cultivating them with the idea that we can and must win.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for that. And then in speaking to the strategy piece, which someone else was asking about too, bringing us together. All right. I think we maybe have time for one more question. Rose, am I allowed? Okay, awesome. I think we started to get into it a little bit here, but I know that people are really interested about this larger movement piece, and Bill already started us in that direction. So I wonder if we could just have maybe each of you talk for just 1 or 2 minutes about the larger movement strategy. And essentially, if we win, if we get a solid majority, how do we make sure we use it to pass big things? How do we get people on the train for the future? And let's start with Mario this time.
Yeah, I'll come back to the first thing that I talked about, which is organization. I think that we need more people involved in more organized formations. So if that's your union, if that's your community group, if that's one of the organizations that, you know, Rose is shouting out in the chat or that Bill was speaking to earlier, the way that, you know, to bring it back to some of my other comments, the way that Cobra Healthcare was passed was because a number of trade unions pushed for it in the American Rescue Plan, right? That's how 100% Cobra happened. You know, that example that I offered up earlier about the right to return for casino workers to work in the state of Nevada happened because like a union pushed for that. Look, with 60 senators, right? Like what could we do? Or without the filibuster, if we had 2 who, you know, would not go the Mansion Cinema route. You know, the first thing that comes to mind for me, just from where I sit, is the PRO Act, right? The Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which could do a whole lot to change, you know, private sector unionization in our country. So those are some thoughts. Bill, where are you at?
Where I'm at is that we are less than the sum of our parts. Let's just be real. We have a lot of great work going on around the country, but people don't feel like they're part of a thing. They feel like they're part of this community organization or this union or whatever, but not feeling like, wow, we really got it going on. And really the we is a big we. That will only happen through organization. And what we need are for organizations such as your own, Mario, not to put you on the spot, but the Unite Here, and we need groups like Progressive Democrats of America. We need a number of these organizations to say, let us build a long-term, not tactical, long-term strategic front that's going to be advancing a set of politics with the objective of winning. And we're going to go state by state, right? It's not just going to be running every 4 years someone for president, but we're going to do exactly what the right did with their statewide legislative strategies when they paid attention to votes or elections that many of us thought were irrelevant. And then all of a sudden in post Roe v. Wade, we're looking around and saying, oh my God, these idiots have control of these state legislatures. Well, they do because we ignored it. So we've got to transform that. And it's a different thinking about organization and about connecting that to strategy.
Perhaps building our movements. Well, thank you so much, Bill. Thank you both so much. I'm going to pass it over to Rose for some closing thoughts. Everyone is not allowed to leave. I'm just going to say that now. I know we hit the end of the Q&A, but no one's going anywhere because we have some important details to get to at the end. And we're going to close by giving a really, really, really warm thank you to Mario and Bill, and everyone has to be here for it. So I'm going to pass it to Rose, and everyone's going to stay in their seats with their Zoom cameras on, and we're going to ride this out together. Go ahead.
Thanks, Cara. It's like we've been on a lot of Zooms together over the last 2 years, huh? Thank you so much, Bill and Mario. I think, I was just thinking while you both were talking, that there's a lot of complexity there. We're talking about a lot of stuff, and some of it is going to take a long time. And even that's like in 3 questions we got to, right? You brought out like 17 more questions and so much more nuance. And, just want to like note the questions in the chat that didn't get answered, and to say like, we don't have all the answers to some of these big questions, but I will say that, especially with some of the questions in the chat that, we didn't get to, I actually think our grassroots partners in battleground states are answering these questions every day. And I think a lot of the stuff around how are we coordinating within states and across state lines? What is the messaging that's going to speak to folks in different communities? How are we connecting our wins to the election cycle, then to the next win? Like, this is what our partners are figuring out and experimenting with their membership all the time. And so even though we didn't get to answer every single question, I really do think one of the answers is go try door knocking, go try phone banking, get involved, donate and fundraise with one of our partners. And we're going to keep learning a lot of these answers as we go through working with them, because they've been figuring it out. Many of our partners have been working for decades on the ground to build power in their states and shift what's possible politically. And just, you know, to paint a picture of that a little bit, right? Like Pennsylvania Stands Up, one of our partners, who they put so much work and energy into electing folks in the legislature who then would help pass this home repair program that just got funded millions of dollars with a Republican-led legislature, right? And so they know how to talk about that at the doors and on the phones. And then when we win in this cycle, to then keep fighting for more funding through these wins, right? Our friends at Durham for All are talking about the connections between the state, federal, and local races and what that means, what they need to hold on to protect abortion access for folks, not only in North Carolina, but across the entire South, right? So our partners are making these connections and thinking about how this election connects to the long term. And so I know it's my turn to tell us to do things. And so, yes, this is transitioning to an ask, but I really mean it. I think we're going to figure out a lot of the answers through the work. And that's why I'm so excited to get to be in the work with so many of you over the next 2 months. And just to say a little bit more about our plans for the year, Mario expertly listed off our states earlier, but we're going to be partnering with grassroots organizations, including Unite Here, as well as a bunch of other local community and statewide community groups in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Georgia, including Pennsylvania Stands Up, who I just mentioned, Durham for All, who I just mentioned, Asian American Advocacy Fund, PAC, Lucha, Showing Up for Racial Justice. We have tons of partners. There's a full list on our website. And we're actually going to have some future events where we get to do deep dives with our different partners, but just wanted to speak a few of them into existence on this call. And so, you know, our task, as Mario laid out in one of the earlier answers to our questions, is pretty clear. We need as many people as possible making calls and knocking doors for these key races over the next 2 months. And again, you know, using the scripts and the lists and the tactics of our partner orgs who really know what it's going to take to win. And so that's what we need support from all of you. We want to look back in 2 months and know that we did everything we could to stop the right from taking more power and creating the conditions for our movements to win a lot more over the next 2 years. And so you don't need to be an expert. There are different roles, and we're going to talk about them in a second, but just to say, you don't need to be an expert. You don't even need to be someone who particularly likes talking on the phone in order to try this out. And if you ever were considering, I know we have people in the chat who are like, have been doing this for years and years, and feel free to throw down your experiences there. But for anyone who is thinking, I actually am not sure I'm ready to take that leap, this is the opportunity, right? Because you will get trained, you will get supported, and by members and leaders and staff of our partner orgs who have brought so many people through this work and into leadership in different ways. And so, you know, it's going to take all of us. And so we're going to list out a few next steps that we're hoping you can take tonight, and want you to think about what's one or more of these steps that you can commit to taking to get plugged in between now and the election. So our 4 asks are: 1, and I think at any point, if it's not there, if folks could throw our link in the chat, that's going to have all of these asks right there. Beautiful, it's right there. 1 is knock doors. So, you know, the link that is in the chat will take you to an info session where you can learn everything you need and more. But we are going to support with logistics and funding to make your trip possible, to be on the ground with our partners. And for anyone who was, you know, someone put something in the chat about this already, but during this time of extreme isolation, talking to voters face to face and having a safe and logistically sound plan to do that, you know, is not to be taken for granted, and I think is a real amazing community building opportunity as well. So as many people as possible who are on tonight, we want you to knock doors. And as we know, it's how we're going to win. Every face-to-face conversation is going to get us 1 vote closer to winning. So that's 1, knock doors. 2, make calls. Shout out to all the phone bankers here. I'm, you know, supporting on our phone banking side of things, and the calls matter. This year, our groups are really going to be coordinating. Where are we focusing our energies on door knocking versus phone banking? What's strategic, since we can really do both more fully this year? So the best way for you to participate is at home. Join a phone bank, get on your first one later this week, and bring your folks with you. So calls are going to be super crucial. Everything from deep canvassing, having those meaningful conversations that are moving people to action, to the nitty gritty, get out the vote. Do you know where your polling place is? Making sure voter suppression isn't getting in the way. You have all the answers you need. Those calls are crucial. That's 2. 3, donate and fundraise. We want to make door knocking available to anyone who wants to hit the doors with us, regardless of you able to fund your own trip. So we could use everyone's support, pitching in what you can. And if you think people in your life might be want to, be more likely to donate than to do something else, you can help us fundraise and actually do that outreach to people who are in your life. 4th, we've got behind the scenes asks. So basically there's other ways to get plugged in more deeply. Those are the first 3. Please say yes to one of those. And additionally, the 4th link on our link of links is other ways you want to get involved. So if you have like really detailed other things you want to do, etc., different skills you want to offer, you can sign up for our general link and just let us know what else you have going on, how you want to contribute to the work. But those first 3, at the end of the day, that's what it's going to take. We got to knock doors, we got to make calls, and we got to donate and fundraise to make it all happen. So lots of chatter happening in the chat. I'll check if we have any questions, but would just say, if everyone could now take a minute, look through those 4 options and put in the chat one thing you're ready to commit to doing between now and November 8th over these next 2 months to make this possible. Are you ready to knock doors, to make calls, to fundraise and donate, to bring your friends in? Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Amazing. I'm going to close this out, but I'm going to do it slowly so everyone has time to write in the chat.
Can I say one more thing, Cara, real quick?
Of course.
Write in the chat and then actually go sign up. So it's a 2-step process. Write in the chat what you want to do. 2, click the link. That's your final step before you leave tonight. But not quite, because we're going to say,
go sign up and then put it in the chat. Say it's already done, ma'am.
All right. Over to you, Cara.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm actually writing an email that's going out tomorrow that many of you will get. And I think I just got inspired to write it because, there's that very trite quote about from Gandhi about being the change you wish to see in the world. But what Mario and Bill both reminded me is that the things you do inspire the kind of person that you are. And door knocking and canvassing is world expanding. It helps us build coalition. It helps us understand the people who are on our side. And so even though I'm not a canvasser by nature, I do a lot of canvassing exactly for that reason. So thank you all for reminding us of what's at stake and why we do the things that we do, not just for the world being better, but for ourselves and keeping the integrity of who each of us are. So thank you so much, Bill and Mario, for that. I will say, obviously, Mario is the director of Unite Here. So if you door knock with us, there's a good chance you'll be with the folks in his organization, Unite Here. I work with them in Georgia. They're amazing people. They're thoughtful, deep canvassers who are working to change the world. And you can knock doors with us while you're reading Bill's books about unions and about power and solidarity and reparations. Those are all things that make you a better canvasser too. So check out Bill's books, sign up with us, sign up with Unite Here, and have an amazing evening. And we hope you'll be in touch soon. Thank you so much.
And we'll have another one of these events in a few weeks with other partner orgs. So look out for the invite to that too.
Yes, really, we're going to have another panel with a lot of our partner organizations. So if this was exciting to you today, then absolutely look out for an email about joining us in October, and keep an eye on our email list in general for lots of opportunities to stay involved and get involved. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night. Oh, Mario's gone.